issues, and we're fortunate to have their time and knowledge. Allow me to introduce our panelists. From the Humboldt County Planning Department, we have Cliff Johnson. And Cliff will speak to the permitting and planning processes involved in addressing abandoned cannabis grow sites, along with Director John Ford. Welcome, John. Joining them is Scott Bauer from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Welcome, Scott, who will address the environmental and wildlife-related compliance issues that often accompany these sites and how we can collectively get these abandoned sites cleaned up. And finally, we have Adonna White from the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board, and she will be sharing information on the water quality considerations and remediation requirements associated with these projects. So here's how tonight will be structured. Each of our panelists will make a presentation in the following order. We'll begin with the Humboldt County Planning Department, followed by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and then the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board. Following the presentations, the remaining time will be dedicated to a Q&A session. So for those of you joining us on Facebook Live, you're welcome to submit your questions by typing them into the comments section, and we'll do our best to address them along with questions from our in-person audience. Please be aware that due to time limitations, we cannot guarantee that all questions submitted will be addressed this evening. So we're thankful to each of our panelists for being here tonight to help our community navigate these complex issues. And before we begin, we have a few forum guidelines that we'd like to go over that will help make the most of our time together this evening. Please be respectful. Our panelists are here as public servants and professionals, volunteering their time and expertise to help our community. We ask that all attendees treat them and one another with courtesy and respect throughout the forum. Our panelists are here to inform. They're here to share information, explain processes, and answer general questions. Please keep in mind that this is an informational forum, not a public hearing or regulatory proceeding. Questions will be collected by Sandy. Everyone knows Sandy DeLuca. Thank you, Sandy. So we ask that you write your questions on the question cards provided and hand them to Sandy, and she'll bring them to me to ask on your behalf. For those watching on Facebook Live, post your questions in the comments, and we will do our best to include them as well. Please keep your questions general. Our panelists are not in a position to advise on or evaluate specific property. Questions should be focused on processes, requirements, and general information rather than individual property situations. No outbursts, please. We understand these issues can be frustrating, and that is exactly why we're here tonight, to provide clarity and a path forward. We ask that you allow our panelists to speak without interruption. Due to limited time, we cannot guarantee that all questions will be addressed. We appreciate your patience and understanding. And finally, if you would please silence your phones. Please note, anyone who's unable to follow these guidelines will be asked to leave the forum. So thank you for your cooperation, and now let's get started. I'll turn it over to our first presenter, the Humboldt County Planning Department.
Okay, I think that's on. It's on. Thank you, Annalise. So my name is Cliff Johnson. I am a planning manager with the Humboldt County Planning and Building Department, and I've been working on cannabis sites and cannabis permits since 2016, which is about when we started this whole experiment. So in 2016, we received almost 2,400 applications for commercial cannabis activities, and around 2022, we had somewhere around 1,300 active cannabis sites. Most recently, we have approximately 850. So that's because of a lot of the sites being abandoned, a lot of them withdrawing from the cannabis permit system. So, and there's also a lot more cannabis sites that have never made it all the way through the permit process and who have also abandoned. their operations. So in this presentation, I'm going to go over some things that we're seeing with abandoned cannabis sites, the county ordinance requirements for sites when those permits are terminated or abandoned, and some of the resources on county websites that are available and can be useful when navigating these properties. If you do take away anything from this presentation, I really hope that being actively communicating with our department is really going to be the most important thing for everybody, and it's really critical when trying to get the most accurate information about these properties. So we primarily have a couple different cannabis operations that we've seen in the hills. In-ground cannabis grows in raised beds. We have cannabis operations that have been in hoop houses with or without electricity. And we have had some very large commercial structures that house cannabis operations. Each of these cannabis sites have their own unique issues that they need to deal with when trying to close out those permits. So one of the things that we've also seen is a lot of changes to the landscape from cannabis. This is a slide showing an area of the northern county, but this is pretty typical throughout the county. This is pre-2016, and then when you move forward, after 2016, you can see a lot of scars on the landscape, a lot of timber conversions and grading that were done without the proper permits. One of the things that we see out there a lot is large grading. Here's another example of something that reflects what you would have seen on that satellite image, large graded flat and timber conversion. This is some more recent grading activities. And then this slide here is showing basically the same thing, but this is much less recent, and you can see that it's been overgrown by a lot of cultivation areas. But that is still a example of a timber conversion that was done without the proper permits. We also have seen a lot of ponds that have been installed with or without permits, often without proper attention to design and proper engineering. So the county cannabis ordinance requires that sites upon termination and abandonment of commercial activity need to be remediated. And what this requires is that they remove all materials, equipment, and other infrastructure, which includes trash, pond liners, electrical fixtures, and all of cannabis waste products, and imported soil and soil amendments from the property once that site has either been abandoned or the cannabis permit has been terminated. In some instances, those things can remain. Some of those things can remain if there's an approved plan that has been reviewed and approved by the department. And I'll get into that in a couple slides in the future. In addition, the ordinance does require that cannabis sites that have had timber conversion that did not go through the proper CAL FIRE process need to be remediated. Usually that looks like restocking the area. Now this is an instance where county ordinance does state this as a requirement, but we really don't have a lot of resources to enforce this. So it's important to note that while this still is a requirement, you may have cannabis sites that have been closed that may not have fully addressed this and may still be subject to some requirements from CAL FIRE. So some of the things that we're seeing out there with abandoned sites, obviously abandoned greenhouses and hoop houses, both with PVC piping and metal structures. We are seeing abandoned skins, like you can see here, and large graded scars on the property. Another example of an abandoned cannabis site with PVC hoop houses and a lot of vegetation that is growing back up into raised beds. Here's some raised beds, another abandoned cannabis sites. These are all things that need to be removed from the property once a cannabis site is terminated, whether that's through closing the permit or when a site is abandoned and they don't actually withdraw or cancel the permit. These things are still required to be removed from the property. So you're going to run into a lot of this when you're looking at abandoned cannabis sites. We do try to identify a lot of the infrastructure that we can see from satellite images, but they don't always show anything. And so here's an example of a site that has been abandoned, but it's been heavily, there's a lot of vegetation that's grown up, and you're not really gonna see this from the satellite images. This is something you would see on the ground. But again, this is something that does need to be removed from the property. When people reach out to us, we may not know that this is on the site because we don't have access to the images that are going to show us, and we may not have been to the site in the last couple of years. So grow bags, things like this, those do need to be removed from the property. Grow bags, these are things that we're seeing out there. I just want to go through a bunch of these with you. Trash, pots, those are often scattered throughout the property. Here's another example of a site that was abandoned, and obviously this needs to be cleaned up before we can actively close out a cannabis site. Trash piles are often found littered throughout properties. These are a violation of the ordinance. They're also a hazard to wildlife. And also, trash is often found scattered throughout forested areas of the site where we may not actually know to go look. So sometimes we do see that they need trash out to other portions of the site that were not necessarily the approved cultivation area. So it's important to keep an eye out for those sort of things. Again, trash piles, these are the greenhouse covers that have been stacked up in a big pile left on the property. All of this stuff should be removed from the property. Soil, in this case containing perlite that's spread throughout the property, is required to be removed. Soil piles should be removed, or the minimum contained, so that they're not getting running off into waterways and things like that. Fertilizer tanks are required to be removed. Water bladders, these are things we see out there that need to be removed. Water lines, propane tanks and other fuel tanks, unless those can be repurposed for another permitted use on the site, those should also be removed. And unpermitted electrical improvements. Those are things that we do see out there sometimes too, and that's obviously a hazard that needs to be removed. And if we do know that that's something that occurs on the property, we do want to see that's removed before we can effectively close out a cannabis application or a cannabis permit. There are some things that can be permitted and stayed on the property, including some things that don't need to be permitted. So water tanks, water storage, those are things that we generally encourage on rural properties, and those can be useful even when there's not a cannabis operation. Water tanks, 5,000 gallons or less, often do not require a building permit, so those can remain on properties. There's another example of water tanks that might be able to stay. Greenhouses and hoop houses on properties that are zoned to allow agriculture, and that is probably the majority of the properties that have had commercial cannabis permits. Up to 2,500 square feet of greenhouses can remain. Anything over that would need to be established as a legitimate commercial agricultural use, and I will get into that in another slide here. So hoop houses, whether they're PVC hoop houses like this or maybe more solid greenhouses, those do still require permits from the county. In most cases, those can be what we refer to as agricultural exemptions. And lastly, large greenhouses like this, there's a lot of other hurdles to trying to deal with these. If a site has been abandoned, obviously removal of these is going to be pretty difficult. A site like this may be more attractive or suitable for some other sort of commercial agricultural property. And as long as we have documentation that that is a use that's going to occur on the property, a business license, maybe a business plan, those are things that potentially can remain on some of these cannabis sites that have been closed out. There are some activities and some improvements that have occurred on these properties that may be more difficult to remediate than just removal of the materials. So graded flats, graded roads, those sort of things may not necessarily be able to be cleaned up in a couple of weeks. They may need engineering. Ponds, in almost every case, needs to have an engineered permit, whether that's actually to remove it or to permit it to stay. And in a lot of these instances, some of these ponds have been constructed without the proper design. And so for certain things that do require a lot more time and effort to remove or to get permitted. We do offer compliance agreements where the property owners or new purchasers would enter into an agreement where they are basically agreeing that they're going to address that within a specified time frame. And we can then move an application or a permit into a closed status with a compliance agreement that we're monitoring. The end goal on all of these is going to be that we have properties that revert back essentially to what they look like before cannabis, and that's really what is hopefully attracting a lot of people to these properties right now. So the requirements of the ordinance are outlined further in the department policy guidance. Basically, it summarizes what I've just gone through, but it's also located on the cannabis website. You can navigate to the Cannabis Services webpage. We have a section for cannabis forms, and that department policy statement is right here. So this is something we share with people whenever they're asking us questions about what to do with these abandoned cannabis sites and how to close them. This is the document that you're going to want to look for. There is also material on the county's website for how to obtain agricultural exemptions. In the permitting website, you have a bunch of information, some information on agricultural permits, exempt permits, additional information on how to walk you through how to apply for those permits. Again, if you have a cannabis operation that is looking to close and wanting to keep perhaps up to 2,500 square feet of greenhouses, we are going to ask that they obtain those ag exempt permits. Those are relatively easy to get, and this you can find information here. There's also essentially a wealth of information on these cannabis sites on the county's permit system, which is called ASELA, and you can find that at the Humboldt Citizens Access. You can just Google that; it'll come up as a top link. This is what will come up when you look at this. Now, in the top right, you'll see something that's called the global search. If you enter in a parcel number, that will then show you all the records that are associated with that parcel. And that includes building permits, it will include code enforcement permits, code enforcement actions, as well as planting permits and cannabis permits. So anything that you'd be looking for relative to cannabis is usually going to start with a PLN number. That may not be cannabis, but in most cases, if you're looking at a former cannabis site, that's what you're going to be looking for. This will also show you the status of that permit. And if you click on it, it also shows you the status. Now, there's a number of different statuses that you need to be aware of when you're looking at these cannabis permits. Withdrawn is one that we're often seeing. Withdrawn closed or just closed without withdrawn closed is really what you're most looking for, because that shows you that everything, as far as the county is concerned, has been dealt with. And we've determined that that permit has no more obligations, at least under the permit. So we do get a lot of calls asking, how can we close this permit? How can we be assured that it's closed and there's no further obligations? If it's in that status, that's really the important thing. Withdrawn with a compliance agreement, probably the next best thing, because that's not officially closed, but we have entered into an agreement with the property owner or future buyer to complete those activities that need to happen so that we can then get it to that closed status. Other statuses that you will see, post-approval monitoring, these are active permits. And in some cases, some of these may actually be abandoned. They haven't made it through maybe up to our radar where we actually do something with it, but that might be happening. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's not an abandoned cannabis site. This means that permit, as far as we're concerned, is currently active. We have statuses of revoked. That means they had a permit and it was revoked for some violations or essentially bad behavior. When you see something like that, that may mean that there are violations out there. So you can reach out to us. We will share with you what needs to happen so that we can get that to a status where hopefully someone's buying a property and they don't have anything that they need to be terribly concerned about. Suspension is a status you may see. That is sort of a revocation or revoked light, and so that could be moving into a status of revoked at some point in the future. Denied, kind of similar. That neighbor had a permit. It got denied when it went to a hearing. And again, these could be some of those sites that they have not necessarily cleaned up we maybe haven't visited them, but we're happy to have conversations with you to identify what needs to happen on there, to get it to a point where we no longer have any active concerns. And then lastly, you're gonna see a number of statuses such as needs further review, or in hearings, or in referrals. Those are things that are actively making their way still through the permit process. You're likely not to encounter many of those if you're seeking to buy a site that seems like it maybe has been abandoned or terminated. When you are in this system, regardless of the status, you can pull in this record info and you'll have access to annual inspections if we have done those, which we have on most of these sites, as well as all the attachments. And if you click on attachments, it'll bring up all of the documents that we have associated with the cannabis permit. A lot of that's going to be very useful. Perhaps the most important thing for applications that have been essentially abandoned or terminated, and they're looking to see if they've met all their obligations, are going to be a compliance agreement, because that outlines all of the items that the county had identified were likely in violation of county code and needed to be addressed as part of the permit process. We also have information on code enforcement cases. Unfortunately, code enforcement cases aren't subject to quite the same public disclosure requirements. You're not going to get all the information on that case, but you can find out what the status is. So a case closed, abated by an owner, there could be other case closed statuses that will show that, there was a code enforcement action on the property, but it's been addressed. It's not something that is any longer considered in violation. There's going to be a number of different statuses with those, but another one that you're going to want to look for is in compliance agreement. That would be a compliance agreement that you could reach out to us and actually obtain the information that shows what needs to happen in order to address those violations. So one of the last things I want to do is just make sure and it's clear that we don't always have information on everything that's occurring on these cannabis properties. In many cases, especially the ones that have been abandoned, we haven't been let onto the site in a couple of years. And so even if we have been able to get it to a point where it's closed, that means that we've considered that all of the issues that we know about that we think are critically important have been addressed, and we've been comfortable moving it to a closed status. But there may still be active county violations out there. There could be CAL FIRE violations, CDFW and water board violations, and there could be other things that we were just simply unaware of. Now, if you are looking at properties and you see anything that you're concerned about, reach out to us, because we're really happy to have those conversations with people and identify what may need to happen to resolve those. But if you do see something that's closed, that again is what you're really looking for. To identify that as far as the cannabis permit responsibilities, those have all been completed. And that is my contact information if anybody has any questions. So I am going to turn this over to, I think, is it Scott that is next? Yep. Scott Bauer.
Backgrounds all changed. Hi everyone, my name is Scott Bauer. I work for the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I just started a new job. And about January, I became the remediation program manager for the state of California. So my job is to clean up all these grow sites, all these abandoned sites. The program's brand new, but I'm really looking forward to trying to see what we can do here. And Humboldt County, as we all know, was ground zero for the green rush. So we're going to start here, and we're going to see what we can do with this issue. So I'm going to discuss, strategy maybe, a little bit about why we care. As you can see in this picture here, we've got greenhouse skins that are sitting there baking in the sun, and I'll talk about why that matters. So why are we here? This is a image of Humboldt County split in half, and all the red parcels you see are the sites that were cannabis at one time. And it turns out, this is the best information that I could find, is there are 1,270 expired, canceled, revoked, inoperative DCC licenses out there on approximately 780 parcels. I know, John, I'm not sure. That's the best information. That's probably wrong, but it turns out. What was that? And that includes probably licenses for dispensaries and what have you. But yeah, we're looking at a lot of parcels that have issues that we need to address. Correlation with that is the number of so. In order to get a license from the state of California, you have to either get a lake or stream bed alteration agreement from us, or a no agreement needed. So if you're in the Central Valley and you're on a farm and there's no creeks or anything around, you typically get a no agreement needed letter from us. But you need a permit. And what we found here in Humboldt County is we've got about 358 incomplete permits, meaning the projects weren't completed. So anytime we issue a permit, we say, well, the road into your cultivation site has these failing culverts on them. We need you to fix those up as condition of your permit. So if you think about it, if there's an average of 5 projects per permit, you're looking at 1,500, 1,600 projects that need to be done that were never completed. And those are projects that have conservation issues for us, things that culvert fails and the dirt goes into the stream, and that affects fish and wildlife. So that's obviously an issue for us. Related to that is about 77% of active permits, so those are existing, they haven't expired, they're out of compliance. That's a huge number. And that can mean a lot of things. You haven't done your reporting or what have you, but still a large number of properties with issues on them. And then the legacy sites, we call those our cultivation sites from about 2015 to 2020, when we were still kind of working through things. They weren't permitted, we busted them, and they just got abandoned. And there's, that's what, decade or more ago, where these sites are just sitting there. There's about 205 of those that are just, everything's falling apart. Those are really critical issues that we're trying to get fixed. That's a huge number. And then lastly, this is so Fish and Game Code. There's a couple of sections. I don't know if you've ever seen the notice of violation from us, but section 1602 deals with any time you get near a stream, you want to divert water, you want to put in a road, you need a permit. That's section 1602. And then there's 2 other ones, and these are like our bread and butter violations that we see. Water pollution is section 5650, and then section 5652 is trash. And there's about 1,000 of those violations on the landscape that haven't been remediated. So those are things that new landowners are going to deal with. They're going to be like, what is this violation? There's 1,000 of them. In Humboldt County, there's thousands across the state, but it's probably one of the bigger numbers that you see in the 58 counties that we have. And we don't like the word abandonment, but it's truly everywhere. Go up in a helicopter. This is a photo I took last year. This is where Nick Vigil, if you know that name, disappeared. Never found him out there. But here you have a huge pond, all this infrastructure. This has been sitting there since 2020 or something. It's just sitting there on the landscape, and eventually that pond may fail. That infrastructure is going to fall apart. The roads going to it are not maintained. So it's a problem anytime you see that kind of thing, or the picture you saw earlier. You pick up these greenhouse skins, and they've been sitting there for 5 years and crumble it in your hands, and it's like fairy dust. Microplastics going everywhere. And we're wondering, if you got a little spring down below, you getting microplastics in your water source, in your water system. We're obviously concerned about that. And then, piles of trash, and on a more landscape scale, this is Route 1, big I think it's Big Creek. Yeah, Big Creek up there. There's about 35 cultivation sites there. 2 of them have licenses. So there's 33 sites that are just sitting there, depositing dirt into our streams. And Big Creek flows into the South Fork Trinity on the far side there. All these little creeks are really cold, really important for salmon and steelhead and for other critters. So, we want to see these sites remediated and get cleaned up. So what I'd probably give this presentation. This is a new presentation, but I kind of want to talk about why we still care. They're abandoned. What does the Department of Fish and Wildlife care? They're no longer cultivating. There's no longer dogs running around and lights, blazing all night. But we still care because the North Coast is a biodiversity hotspot. This is a amphibian richness. This is the number of amphibians, and we're like top in the state. So all these very rare species of red-legged frog, yellow-legged frog, southern torrent salamander, tail frog, they're here. That's why a lot of us came here, right? Because it's a really rich environment. We've got more birds than any place in the state, 100 plus species that are here all the time. Can't even see that. Mammal richness is super high, and then fish too. So it's important that we get these sites cleaned up because we are a special place. Humboldt County, North Coast of California is special, and we want to make sure that those habitat values, right? These habitat values are maintained. These are some of the fish that we've been working really hard and spent millions and millions of dollars to recover. Chinook salmon, coho salmon. We've got the amphibians and the reptile there, the wet turtle. These are all found in the streams that people are diverting water out of. They're impacted by sediment, by plastics. We want to make sure that they're protected. And then a real iconic species, the Pacific fisher, the spotted owl. I've seen they have the trellis netting that gets left behind. I've seen dead fawns strangled to death in abandoned trellis netting. Birds fly into them. Bumblebees will get caught in the old greenhouse skins. They get trapped, and bumblebees they have listed bumblebees. They're endangered species. So we need to get rid of this stuff off the landscape to protect these species. So where do we start? And this is a site I was just at 6 months ago there. Trash everywhere. Where do we start this process? Because it involves all of us. And I made up this little flow chart here just the other day because I was trying to think of a simple process. What does it look like for you all, for your clients, for regular people to go through the process? And I call it phase 1 because this is just like getting the permits or maintaining the permits so that you can do the cleanup. And we have the abandoned cultivation site at the top, right? First thing you do is you contact us. So we have this email, it's a general email, where you can say, hey, I've got APN number. APN numbers are really valuable, and a latitude and a longitude, and the center of the parcel, what's going on with this property. And if you don't have any violations on the property, it doesn't mean it could be a permitted site, right? Or it was a permitted site, and they had a permit, so you want to find out if we have a lake restraint alteration agreement. And if there is one there, and it's still, it's still live, it hasn't expired, you want to transfer that permit, because transfer is much cheaper than getting a new permit, like thousands of dollars cheaper. So that's that simple process if you have no fish and game code violations. If you do have violations and a notice of violation, I think I might have shared that last time I presented to you all, have that, again, was there a permit issued? Because people that do get busted occasionally get a permit to do the work. And if they do have a permit, again, if the permit helps you, it's a weird thing to say, nobody likes permits, but you want to have our permit so that you can do the work and you can save the money, because if you don't have a permit, then we got to do a site visit, and we have to get you to apply for one, and then the dollars start adding up. So get that permit one way or another. But site visit is really important. Now the legacy sites, those are places we haven't been in 8-10 years. We gotta go do a site visit, and that's this group right here, most likely, a planner, a water board, someone from Department of Fish and Wildlife does a site visit, and then somebody gets a permit to do the work. But it's not all that scary, and I can tell you why here. Because help is on the way. We have this new program, fairly new. How many people have heard of the Cannabis Restoration Grants Program? Few of you, yeah, okay. So we have this pool of money that we get from an account called the Environmental Restoration and Protection Account. And it's basically funded by the users, by people that consume the product, right? Vapes, oils, whatever. A portion of the sales tax goes to the CRGP. And that's about 20 million a year. So 20 million to help do the remediation, do the cleanup. Looking at doing local partnerships, but you got about 20 million. We've helped a lot of licensed cultivators with that money. We've cleaned up a lot already, but the funds are out there. But before everybody gets excited about it, there are some caveats, right? You have to be an eligible applicant. So either tribal, nonprofit, I know I've talked to somebody in here about forming one, or a public agency. Those are the only people that can receive the funds. Like I said at the bottom there, individual cultivators and for-profit businesses are not eligible. So you have to find a nonprofit or an agency or something to help you get that money. And we really want collaboration. I think I have, maybe it's the next slide here. No, not yet. So there's a funding opportunities for you all, for your clients, for anybody listening. The cleanup, remediation, and watershed enhancement opportunity is kind of what we're all talking about here. To do remediation, to clean up properties, that's what we're going to use as that category. There's a whole bunch of other stuff we're doing. We're doing a lot of incredible research with that money, working with tribes, but that's kind of how we're doing this work that we're talking about. And again, just some more information, really the gist of it is, clean up, remediate, restore, enhance the habitats that are out there. And like I said, we're a biodiversity hotspot. We're, this is an important place, so we want to get those places cleaned up that were impacted by cannabis cultivation. Let's see here. A little bit more about, quality. It's got to be it could be on public land, it could be on private land, road treatments are huge. I see a lot of roads that need work and to access these properties. Wildlife enhancement and water conservation. So, there's a lot of opportunities for people that are going to set up on old cannabis growth. We want people to have storage so they're not diverting water in the summertime, and we can help with that. Oh, bullfrog there. This is it's really easy to find it. It's on our website, Cannabis Restoration Grants Program. Take a look at it. There's a storybook, I think it's called a storybook, that shows you the projects we funded across California. Really cool. But check it out. It's super helpful. And you start with the concept. So we have a pre-application process where you kind of say, hey, here's what I want to do. You're not doing the entire application because you might get told, come back to us with other things you want to cover. But most importantly, when it comes to the grant topic here, we don't want to see parcel by parcel applications. We can't possibly do that. We don't have the staff. Managing grants is it's bureaucracy. It's a challenge. So we want people to pool their projects together. Do I have a laser pointer here? I don't even know. But, grouping parcels together in important watersheds that we really care about, with a nonprofit leading it. Like I say here, the scale of the effort that we're talking about, it's immense, and really is going to require all of us to work together. We can talk more about how we can do that. I just want to let you know, there is opportunities to help, but we just can't have 500 applications for 500 parcels. It just doesn't, it's not efficient, it doesn't work. So be thinking about it. There are opportunities to get these places cleaned up. I think that's it. I hope you have a lot of questions about that, and again, I appreciate people reaching out to me with their APNs and like what's going on this property. You know, we try to get back to you as soon as we can and try and keep momentum going, because I often think about, like, you know, we spent the past 30, 40 years doing timberland restoration, all that previous logging and all that damage over the decades. We've done all that work. We've spent hundreds of millions of dollars. The green rush is over, and now we have this next thing that we're going to be cleaning up, you know, that we've got probably 30 years of cleanup to do, but look forward to working with you all on this in the future, so thanks.
Good afternoon. My name's Adona White with the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board. Thanks. I'm going to lean on some of the things that Cliff and Scott covered and not repeat them, but they're common issues. First of all, I want to just cover the structure of the water boards because a lot of people aren't clear on it. There's the State Water Resource Control Board that has the Division of Water Quality, the Division of Water Rights, and the Division of Drinking Water was most recently added. The first thing I learned when I started this job that I don't talk about water rights. I leave that to the Division of Water Rights. There's 9 regional boards. We're up here in the North Coast region, Region 1. Because we're the best, we're the most interesting, as Scott covered, we're the most interesting species and water resources to protect. The North Coast Board has 2 offices, where our headquarters is in Santa Rosa, and just in the last couple of years, we have an office in Eureka in the old Times Standard building. And we have about, I think, 25 staff there now. So as we have new hires, more and more people are going to the Eureka office. And so they're more available to you. With respect to cannabis, we have our Cannabis General Order, and we work towards compliance with that order, as well as enforcement of water quality threats and order conditions. You know, a lot of the same threats to water quality are the same issues that Cliff and Scott covered in terms of grading and disturbed areas, stream crossings and roads. We want to ensure that those don't deliver sediment to streams. We want to make sure that chemicals and fertilizers and petroleum are properly stored or cleaned up and removed from the property. Similarly, trash, greenhouse waste, potting soils, and also riparian disturbance where there's been vegetation clearing or grading within an area close to a stream. That's of significant concern to us. So those are the sorts of water quality threats that we address on cannabis sites. Our strategies to deal with those threats, the first one is our waste discharge requirements. It's essentially a permit to, when there's land use activities that have the potential to threaten water quality, we generally have a waste discharge permit or a waste discharge requirement to address that. With respect to cannabis, there's a statewide water board's cannabis cultivation policy. That policy covers it covers water rights and water quality and identifies a lot of very specific terms of site conditions that are protective of water quality and that should be achieved through implementation of the permit. The policy is incorporated into our permit, our Cannabis General Order, and so compliance with the General Order means compliance with the cannabis cultivation policy. And if there's in-stream work to be done or work in wetlands, then that's a water quality certification is the pre-authorization to do that in-stream work. It's a parallel permit to the CDFW Lake and Stream Bed Alteration Agreement. We also, recognizing that there's been so many properties that haven't been permitted but are cultivating cannabis, we have a pretty significant enforcement program where we coordinate with law enforcement, with our partner agencies, and go and do inspections on search warrants, as well as try to ensure that there's unified plans for remediation, and that technical reports can satisfy multiple agencies and reduce redundancies. We have an enforcement policy which identifies progressive enforcement. We do inspections, we issue notices of violation. If something's egregious or requires more technical and a qualified professional to come up with a technical plan, we could issue a cleanup and abatement order, and that's enforceable. If timelines are missed in that, then we could issue penalties. And we also can issue investigative orders requiring monitoring or technical reports. With respect to our cannabis general order enrollments, they're required for commercial cannabis cultivation. There's 2 tiers for less than an acre, greater than an acre. There's risk levels with high, moderate, and low risk depending on the site characteristics. There's annual fees, and that requires that you maintain site conditions consistent with the cannabis policy. As part of the general order enrollments, technical reports are required to be developed. Site management plans identify the site layout and the various features and the things that are out of compliance with the cannabis policy and a schedule to achieve those. Some properties that are high risk, where there's been riparian disturbance, perhaps there was grading too close to a stream, that would be considered a high risk site. That's required those folks are required to develop a disturbed area stabilization plan for those areas within close stream areas and riparian setbacks. Similarly, erosion and sediment control plans for places where there's been grading and construction on steeper slopes, and it really identifies the erosion control measures. And then, of course, the water quality cert application for in-stream and wetland work. As Scott said, getting a permit is challenging. It requires, oftentimes qualified professional and you're basically investing in the technical assessment and the permit. You kind of want to keep that. Let's see. And once you have a water quality certification, we also call it a 401 permit for Clean Water Act Section 401. We expect implementation and a completion report and monitoring to ensure that it was implemented successfully. So that was a little overview on permitted sites. In terms of unpermitted cultivation properties, as I said, we often go do inspections through warrants, complaints, and agency referrals, and there may be documentation of our findings available through our inspection reports or notice of violations or our subsequent orders. If we have issued a cleanup and abatement order and perhaps it wasn't complied with in terms of missed deadlines for technical reports or missed deadlines for implementation work, we may develop a complaint and issue an administrative civil liability, which is a monetary penalty. And that goes in front of our board for approval. And once they have adopted a penalty, then we would put a lien on the property. So that once if that property were to transfer, we would ensure that our penalty gets paid. So I'm going to talk about some things to look for when buying and selling properties. Let's start with selling. First of all, if you're gonna sell the property, it's best to clean it up through all the things that Cliff and Scott covered. By all means, take the plastic and especially fertilizers and petroleum products, get those out first before they get rained on and spread around. If there's an existing enrollment, you could terminate that enrollment if you don't want to transfer it. And you want to submit a notice of termination form. Again, as Cliff said, communicate, don't just go silent and assume it's going to go away. Because if you're enrolled under the Cannabis General Order, you're going to stay enrolled and you're going to keep getting invoices until you terminate. So if you want to terminate, submit a notice of termination form. I'm going to give you the websites where those resources are. If you want to transfer an existing enrollment to a new buyer, you'll have to first address any outstanding invoices and submit a change of discharger form. And then once that transfers, the same requirements would be carried forward to the new owner. If the regional board has issued an order, like a cleanup and abatement order or water quality certification, you should notify our office that there's a change of ownership. And I'll get a little more into those topics in a moment. With respect to buying a property, if you could transfer if the buyer wants to continue cultivating and there's an existing enrollment, again, pay the outstanding invoices and submit the change of discharger notification. We expect that the remediation gets addressed, including any unresolved violations. We suggest transferring that water quality certification so that the in-stream work can proceed. We will not forget about any cleanup and abatement orders that are on the property. I will not forget about my cleanup and abatement orders. And so we track that. If we see that selling a property doesn't get you out from under your cleanup order. The cleanup orders describe the responsible party, and that step stays true even in the instance of a sale, but we can work with the buyers and sellers and ensure that the remediation can proceed. The technical reports that were bought and paid for on the property and developed for the property, you probably want to make sure you get a copy of those. Because that's a lot of work, that's valuable work that's already been done. If there's, for new enrollment applications, some of the common delays could be avoided by ensuring that you know about the unpaid invoices from the previous owners. That the application doesn't have a conflicting risk level from the previous enrollment on the same parcels. And that there's no unresolved cleanup or non-compliance issues. So in terms of what can you do yourself to figure out what's going on the property? Well, there's our North Coast homepage and our cannabis program webpage. We have an adopted orders page where you can go and put in the name of the previous owner and see if there's a adopted order, a cleanup and abatement order. Again, you can look up the water quality certifications if there's one for the property. These are mostly by name, unfortunately, not by APN. So that can make tracking it down a little challenging. You can search by county. If you want to know if there's a notice of violation, we have a webpage that, on our webpage, there's a link to notice of violation, and on there's directions for our CWICS, California Integrated Water Quality System database, which is where we store all of our permits and cleanup orders and all our info is stored in this database. There's a public-facing website here. You can go and search it and follow the directions. It's a little bit limited, but it's a resource to start with. And if you don't find what you need, then you can get a hold of us. The website up there, northcoast.cannabis, that is, send everything there. For your inquiries, there's people who may track that inbox and have great resources about our enrollments and orders that can help. You can ask about a certain property and we can do our own CWIX record search with the APN, the parties, or waste discharge identification number, which is issued as part of the notice of applicabilities for enrollments. And we can help identify site conditions that might threaten water quality by looking into the enrollment status, by searching our own inspection reports and notice of violations and that specify corrective actions. We might have a record of compliance assistance, and we can see if there's orders been issued by the regional board. So there's breadcrumbs to help understand what the site issues are and how to, what needs to be addressed and the obligations to the regional board. And there's individual staff. As I said, that main web email address is the best place to send correspondence and you might get the quickest answer. But I'm a cannabis enforcement inspector. There's my email. Shannon Utley heads up our Northern Agricultural Unit. She's in our Eureka office and has staff there. Jeremiah is our enforcement coordinator. He's my supervisor. And Kaysen is our division chief. And if you have questions or concerns about a particular property, get a hold of us and we'll do our best to help you out. And if you don't hear right away from us, then be persistent. And I think that's all I have. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Adona, and thank you to all of our panelists for those great presentations and resources. So now we're going to be moving into the second part of tonight's forum, which is going to be the Q&A. So again, if you have questions, please write them down on the questionnaire cards as clearly as possible, as legibly as possible for me, and hand them over to Sandy. She'll get them to me, and we will begin this question portion. And apologies if we don't get to your question tonight. So I will ask the question, and then the first panelist that wants to tackle it, go ahead and raise your hand, and I'll get you the mic until each panelist has had an opportunity to have their say. So, first question, for the good of the community and the wildlife, how can we work together to encourage current owners and/or prospective buyers to do the cleanup that don't include fines? John.
So we are not looking for money from people in terms of cleaning the property up. We have had a lot of success with people who come in and want to buy the property and identify the things that need to be done to get it cleaned up. As Cliff mentioned, sometimes it takes a little bit more work. They enter into a compliance agreement to get it done within 6 months or a year. And we do that without a fee, without a fine, without anything, because our ultimate objective is to see these properties cleaned up, and that's our starting point. So.
Generally, if there's been a penalty issued by the water board that's known about, generally speaking, there's not going to be fines after the fact unless it was a formal adopted penalty. But we will work with you on cleanup.
Yeah, and I'll just add, So this is all we hear all the time, is we don't have the money to do the work. And, that's where grant programs come into play. We've never really cared about the fines. I mean, like John Dona said, it's about getting the properties cleaned up. It's about, the conservation value of the property is more vital. So we're happy to discuss it. And I forgot to mention in my presentation, when people buy a property and there's a large fine levied on it, it's more complicated. We prefer to see people not run away from their responsibility, but we certainly, will discuss with the new landowner how we fix it, because it is more important to see wildlife return to the property than collect money, frankly. So hopefully we can have those discussions with people down the road,
Yeah, and let me just kind of add, while Scott was talking, I realized I didn't put my code enforcement hat on. And now so there are properties that have fines and penalties on them. There's a notice of violation, there's a notice to abate. And so when those fines and penalties run with the person, not the land. So when a new buyer comes in and purchases the property, they're then inheriting a responsibility. They have responsibility for the violations that exist on the site. Then if they're willing to clean that up, that resolves the violation. There's no need for fines and penalties. So I just want to be really clear about that. I think that's an important point.
Thank you. Our next question is, how many of the 15,000 CEQA baseline assessment sites are potentially abandoned who never sought permits?
So the 15,000 sites were literally 15,000 gardens. And when we evaluated it and looked at those numbers, we found that that was probably 5,000 to 6,000 parcels. So from the county's perspective, as Cliff mentioned, we originally took in nearly 2,400 applications. How many under 2.0 do you think? So maybe 400 under 2.0, so probably 2,800 applications. Those reflect parcels. Could be multiple parcels. We've done at least 1,000 abatements through code enforcement. So we've probably touched about 3,800 of those parcels between permitting and code enforcement. The big issue is the sites that just never quite got cleaned up.
When a seller doesn't give access to a record, what is the best way to find out information about the record in question?
Sure. So there's a couple of situations where that could be the case. A lot of times, if you're looking and finding a code enforcement case on a seller, that's not going to give you much information. So you do need to actively reach out to us. We're continuously uploading information to a seller, so it's continuing to get better. There's always going to be more information that we're adding. But if you are not finding what you need on there, just reach out to us. We're happy to talk with people. I mean, that is the best way to find information. Even if you do find what you are looking for and you still have questions, just reach out to us.
All right, the next question, we may have gone over a little bit, but maybe we could go more in depth. Has the state or other agencies created any remediation funds that can help a future buyer with these violations? And where can we find the list of any other grants for cleanup?
This thing working, yeah. Yeah, I talked about that. The Cannabis Restoration Grants Program is one of the funding sources. There's those can help new landowners. So that money is available. There's also, I think it's called nature-based solutions, that CNRA, California Natural Resource Agency, which we're a part of, Water Board.
I'm actually Cali, PA.
Oh, you are?
Yes.
Oh, never mind. CNRA has, I think, state parks, fish and wildlife, a bunch of agencies. So there's money there. Prop 1, the climate bond, there's a ton of sources of funds in there, a lot of money going out. I think this year, 1.3 billion under all kinds of programs. So there's money out there. It's just, finding the eligible entity to help you out, because you can't do it alone. And most of them are pretty, they're not super easy, but they're also not, and they're not insurmountable.
Also, in Trinity County, we've seen examples of Calorie Cycle partnering with the county and identifying properties that have been abandoned with significant solid waste issues. So it's really for the trash. So we've seen examples of that, but I think that would be in partnership with the county.
This might be a quick answer. Scott, you showed us some grants, but said a for-profit business can't receive grants. If the business has failed, can they apply?
I'm not sure what that means.
I'm not either. I imagine maybe if they formed a nonprofit.
No, I mean, actually, one of the things I wanted to mention about, we need more nonprofits involved in this business. I know I'm having discussions with some people next week about it, but there's simply not enough nonprofits to manage all, what we need to get accomplished. So, yeah, a nonprofit can get a grant and then hire a sub who's a for-profit to do the work, have equipment operators. So it doesn't mean you can't profit, it's just that you have to have a nonprofit. So anybody who wants to explore that, look into a 501c3, we need more of you. Just like the Uncle Sam poster, we want you to form nonprofits that can help us do all this work.
Can the grant programs clean up properties where the existing owners have violations, notices, or does the property need to change hands first? Is there a way for existing Humboldt County residents who have violations to take advantage of these programs on these properties?
Yes, there's some inherent difficulties with that, right? If people that we've been asking, even though they've had notice of violations on their property for a decade, to clean up their stuff, and then they come to us for grants, they can apply, but it's hard. I'm sure, right? It's like you've known about it. You've let these activities damage public trust resources forever. It's a struggle for some of us to really, say, okay, it's fine, we'll give you the money, but you certainly can apply. It's just some violations, I'm not even sure if you have a CAO, I think you can still apply.
Yeah, CAO doesn't preclude consideration.
So you can have, cases that have been filed and you can still apply for funds, and it'll be entertaining. I meant that in a good way.
These outlaws, they've been outlaws.
Yes.
All right, is there opportunity for local job creation to work on cleaning up these sites?
Sorry, I don't mean to dominate, but this is something that's really, I was just talking to someone about this the other day. I don't know, for those of you that are old enough, Jobs in the Woods was a program that the federal government had about 1990-ish, where we were training timber fallers, equipment operators, and timber, we reduced our harvest on federal lands to protect spotted owl. Part of that was to retrain people to do restoration work, restore streams that are impacted by timber. And we're kind of in that place now. I see jobs in the woods for cannabis cultivators, right? Like it's a retraining program. A lot of them have equipment experience. A lot of them built their own sites. Certainly can put that together. I think that's the future, really, is to bring people that were involved in this industry that has since gone down quite a bit, substantially, bring them into the fold to do the recovery. I think that'd be really cool.
And just kind of teeing off of the jobs in the woods concept, doing cleanup work, some of it's, should be done by a licensed contractor. Some of it doesn't require a licensed contractor. So really identifying which cleanup could be done under what level of expertise and liability coverage is pretty important to efficiently use resources on the cleanup.
John or Cliff, did you want to tackle that one?
Of course, everything that's been said is true, and there is opportunity to create jobs out of this. I think one of the things that Scott's been strongly hinting at is that part of our struggle to clean these sites up and use governmental money is that governmental money can't be to the benefit of a private individual. But if there were nonprofits and there were organizations that were nonprofits that were formed to clean up sites, that would create jobs, that would address some of what's going on, and that would be able to, I'm going to use this in the best possible way, absorb all that money that is available to do this.
So what solutions can you, county, provide to expedite public records requests?
So first, let me be defensive and say the planning and building department gets more public records requests than the rest of the county combined. We've got one full-time person, that's all they do. I guess we could add staff to do, to reduce the time it takes to do that, but frankly, our budget really isn't there to do that. We do the best that we can to turn those around, but we get a lot of them, and some of them are large and complicated.
And I just want to add that it is not uncommon that we get Public Records Act requests that are for information that you actually can find on the county's Acela system. And so, sometimes you may not need to file a Public Records Act request. Often, if you're not finding what you need, that might be the way to do it. But we do have a bunch of information on there. We're continuously expanding what's available on it.
Yep. One more thing, and there's at least one realtor in this room that takes advantage of this. We do have counter hours. And there's a lot of people that come in and just take advantage of that. So, I mean, if you want to sit in your office and submit a Public Records Act request, yeah, you can do that. But there's also Acela, there's also just coming in and talking to us.
Okay, I can appreciate that. It looks like this question might be for Adona. If the owner is under an LLC, is a name of the person also on record? And I imagine they mean as far as liability goes.
Good question.
Yeah, LLCs are a little tricky, but we call them dischargers, if the main entity who is doing the activities that could threaten water quality, we call them dischargers. If the discharger's an LLC, and we are, say, issuing a cleanup and abatement order, we will name the LLC. If we have information also about the individuals involved in the work, we will also name the individuals, but we don't pierce the corporate veil when it comes to, if it's just an LLC, we can't go after the individual members or agent of service if it's just the LLC. But if we have additional information, which oftentimes we do, have a lot of different lines of evidence, then we will certainly try to involve individuals, because that's a lot easier to get traction with. Did that address your question?
Well, it wasn't my question, but I
Good
imagine.
question.
So we do have some time, and this question might be a little more general and might need to take some more time on, but can someone please explain as much about water rights as possible? Domestic storage, cannabis irrigation. Does anyone want to tackle that high level?
I'll go high level. So the Division of Water Rights, they regulate the diversion and storage of surface water, not groundwater. Water quality, we do regulate discharges to surface water and groundwater, just as an aside. With respect to diversion and storage, you're supposed to file an initial statement of diversion and use for each point of diversion. If you're storing water for more than 30 days, you're supposed to have a water right to do that. There are some streamlined water rights for storage, which include a small domestic registration for storing water for use on your homestead with your domestic garden. There's a small cannabis irrigation use registration, which is as part of the cannabis cultivation policy. It's in there, and those, what can I say about those? There's a lot of conditions that need to be achieved in that water right. In terms of how to change the diverter or the operator, or how to cancel and a small irrigation use registration, I can't speak to those, unfortunately. But there is on the website I gave you for the water board's cannabis, there's, you can also get to the Division of Water Rights, and there's a wealth of information there. Please add to that
No,
answer.
that was great. And you're not done. If you divert water from a stream, you need a permit from us, a lake and stream alteration agreement, and people can't tell you how annoyed people are that two agencies require this, but our job is to keep water in the streams for fish, and so we put conditions on it, that on your permit, that says you have to keep water in the stream. So and frankly, the cost of a water diversion permit for 5 years, it's maybe it's $150 a year. I pay that a month in the city of Eureka, so it's a pretty cheap permit, and more importantly, maybe we can help get you storage. And if you're a rural landowner, droughts are more common. We get less rain in the spring. I mean, our window of rain, of precipitation just keeps getting narrower and narrower, and our streams are going dry faster. They're getting low sooner. We need people to get storage so that they're not diverting water in the summertime. If you care about fish, we need people to get on board, and let's figure out funding mechanisms to get you storage so that you can turn off the spigot from your little cold spring and keep that water going into streams that we care about. So just reach out to us and we can help with the permit. And our two agencies often go out together and look at your diversion and figure out conditions that you can have water and so can the fish. Thanks.
So speaking of having you out to the property, if we as real estate agents invite any of you onto the property, are we at risk of making things worse for our clients? Adding violations?
Adding violations, I mean, typically, I mean, I've been out with a number of you, and I've been out with new landowners, and I think it's beneficial, because if you don't, you know, I mean, maybe we also can help with grant funding, and help. I just was on a property not too long ago, and there's like 2 miles of road that are failing that go to their property, and I'm like, this road needs to be fixed, not only for you, but for your access, but for fish and wildlife, so it's beneficial. We're not gonna like do a gotcha, you know, you invited us, and now here's a bunch of additional violations. We're not gonna do that. You know, we appreciate people that wanna have us out there, and let's explore how we can fix it. You know, how we can make your property safer, you know? I mean, we're doing there's a lot of fire resiliency money out there too. The state, especially with the Proposition 1. And all these properties that we're talking about, they all need, you know, vegetation management. I mean, catastrophic fires, remember the August complex was 1 million acres. And those kind of fires are gonna be more common. So we go out and might be like, hey, you know, here's an opportunity to do forest health project on your property, and it's funded, and it benefits you, and it benefits wildlife. So if anything, and of course I'm biased, but I think it's valuable to bring both of our agencies and the county out to your property to see like how can we improve it for conservation, and how can we improve it for you.
When we get invited to a property, you know, we're not going with blinders necessarily, just to be honest. If there's something easy, we'll mention it. We may document it and have an inspection report. If it's complex, we'll also provide some guidance in terms of what the concerns are and what needs to be done to fix it. It could result in a notice of violation for clarity, to emphasize that it's really important to us. If it was super egregious and nobody was working with us, we might consider issuing a cleanup and abatement order. But generally speaking, I think it's best to be clear on what the issues are, and so that for the seller and the buyer, they can go in eyes wide open, have a to-do list, come up with an agreement of some sort of a strategy to get the issues dealt with. Kicking them down the road by not getting the right input may end up being more complicated and costly. And I can tell you that even though I work in our enforcement program, I spend the majority of my time doing compliance assistance. And we're happy to talk to you and work with you and help come up with a punch list of what needs to get done. But it's not a true statement to say it wouldn't necessarily lead to a notice of violation. But mostly we would be there with the spirit of trying to come up with clear guidance on what needs to get done. Thanks.
If planning and building, you have.
So when planning is going out to look at cannabis sites, we're there to look at the cannabis activities. And so we're not out there looking to find other violations. A lot of the sites that we go out and do inspections on, or that we're asked to go out and look at, they may very well have unpermitted residences and other things. We're not there to look at that. I would say in probably 99.9% of the time when we've been out there and identified violations, those do not turn into notice of violations. We don't have those discussions where we all of a sudden come back in office and interact and talk to the code enforcement division. That doesn't happen. And so we are out there having conversations and trying to encourage people to clean up what needs to be cleaned up in the context of the cannabis permit. But we're not going out there with a code enforcement lens on.
So this next question from the audience, it's really easy to get a violation during an inspection. Are the actual violations taken into consideration when evaluating whether an entity can receive the CDFW grant? And can the grant application be denied simply because they have a notice of violation on record?
Well, I'll just start with the caveat that I'm not part of the CRGP. It's a separate program. And, you know, I can't think of, you know, there have been cases, I'll say this, there have been cases that are pending, things are going on, somebody, you know, there's fines and whatnot, where we tend to, that, you know, particular individual might not be high priority for funding. It doesn't preclude them from funding, but the priority might not be at the top due to, let's say, 10 years of violations. That's a true situation. 10, 12 years of getting people, like, it's been 12 years now, and you haven't done anything, now you want money, you know, that's you know, priority-wise, we have other, you know, we also, I mean, we really focus on priority watersheds. Like, what are the key watersheds that we need to get addressed first with high fisheries values, you know, fish and wildlife habitat's really critical. That's where our focus is. So there's all these other things that go on in the, you know, world of humans, like, you know, people have violations and we're trying to work through them, but we're really focused on priority watersheds, and that takes, you know, takes the lead over everything else. But the violation issue is something that's still being, you know, worked out. Like, can they get funding? That's something I don't think is necessarily a law or written down anywhere, whether that precludes you from funding. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you. Have any of the agencies or the county considered making exceptions and granting leniency to the properties with violations or abatements that are also someone's primary or only residence?
So, from a code enforcement standpoint, we actually have a lot of ability to work with property owners to get things done. That even includes working with them on fines and penalties. That includes defining what needs to be done to resolve the violation. I think I've been involved in a lot of meetings with property owners who come into my office, who sat down about a few sites, and just talked about what really were the important things to get done and to resolve the violation, and we've been able to resolve those. So, I mean, if you call that leniency, well, let me also say, sometimes it doesn't involve like doggedly sticking to everything that's on the notice. Sometimes some things can be, other things can be done to kind of address things in a more holistic scale. And so, yeah, we work with people a lot.
That's good to hear, thank you. And this is a nice general question. How is the cannabis tax being used?
Well, number one, the cannabis tax is no more. So, Major S was, not, I guess it was repealed out of the Humboldt County Code, but since it was adopted by, the voters, it can't completely go away, but it's not being collected any longer. The way it was being used, was really as a buffer within the county budget. It was never strictly put into an ongoing funding requirement because we never were sure what the actual tax would be, especially as the board started to lower the tax or eliminate the tax or forgive the tax. And so from a budget standpoint, it's very dangerous to try to add programs or add on employees to be funded by something you're not sure if it's going to be there long term. So there was really only, 2 or 3 years where the tax was collected in total. And so it was never really put into the budget.
Are there any ways for-profit business can help clean up where property has a code enforcement case open? And which part of the county should they talk to, if so?
Yeah, I mean, as I think Scott has said, partnerships are the way that a lot of the county is going to get cleaned up. This is a pretty big job, and we often work with like receivers who will come in and get orders from the court when there's a violation there to take control of the property. They'll clean it up and then they'll sell it. The proceeds then go to the cost of cleaning the property up and then paying off any of the county costs and any of their costs. That's we found that to be far more effective than the county trying to do abatements. And so that's actually absolutely a for-profit business. I think that if, contractors, as Donna mentioned, that some of the things really should be done by people who know what they're touching, want to go out and clean things up. That's helpful. When we do abatements, we actually have a list of contractors that we use to go out and do abatements, and we use them on a rotating basis. And so when the county's taking on the abatement, we use one of those contractors. The problem, if there is one with that, is that then a lien gets put on the property, and so that's kind of stretching out over time. But I think there's lots of room for for-profit businesses to get involved in this.
Do any of the other panelists have ideas how for-profit businesses can help with cleanups?
I would just say that there's so much cleanup to be done at a variety of levels of technicality, how technical levels. And I think that there's people who need help, and so if you're providing services to help people, I think that there's probably room in there. How do you get the word out? That's another story, but I can say that there's a lot of people who have cleanup to do that don't know how to begin. And so I think that there's room amongst the great consultant pool in the county. There's probably additional room for hauling off plastic, for example.
So do the databases that each of your agencies use to track compliance and violations, do they track it by category? So it sounds like, in other words, what percentage of these violations are low risk versus medium versus high?
Our database doesn't do that. I mean, that's more of a, excuse me, it's more of what our scientists see on the landscape and, prioritize that, but it'd be really, we've thought about that actually, like, this is like, well, we have our high priority sites, we all kind of know, but we don't, in our database, we don't, like, it's not ranked yet. That's one of the things we're exploring.
I'd just say from a code enforcement standpoint, we do tend to look at sites in terms of priority. And if there's something that is obviously gonna be an environmental problem, the other stuff that's already in the queue can maybe not be gotten to as fast, and that gets looked at much faster. But that's just an assessment that we make.
Thank you. So how many permits were revoked because of unpaid Measure S taxes, and how many are scheduled at the moment?
We revoked 36 yesterday. We revoked, I want to say about 30 previously. Is it 50 or 60? So we probably revoked maybe 100 due to Measure S taxes. We're in the process of denying permits. And it may seem strange to have an application be denied for not paying Measure S, but in a lot of cases what happened is they had an interim permit. They were able to cultivate for a while. They didn't pay their taxes during that period of time. And so then they never completed their permit. And so that's sitting out there, and those are now in the process of being denied. If you want to add to that.
Yeah. So at this point, almost all of the cannabis permits that were passed due on Measure S taxes and had not entered into a payment plan have been revoked or resolved in some manner. And so that's not going to be something that we see in the future. The only thing that we might see in the future are the people who are currently on a payment plan for taxes who don't meet those obligations.
Yeah, Karen, there's a big date coming up at the end of this year. And people are required to pay, is it a quarter? Or 20%? Is it 5 years? It was 5 years. So 20% of whatever they owe, that needs to be paid this year. And if they don't pay that, they're likely to see revocations. So it's just information to be aware of.
Sorry, one last thing is that what we're talking about is people with active permits or permit holders, and so it's important to know, and maybe everyone does, but when a cannabis site is closed or abandoned and a new property owner takes over, that new property owner is not responsible for any Measure S taxes.
Okay, and as I'm coming to the end of my pile of questions, I just wanted to give you panelists a moment if there was anything that kind of came to mind during this question period or during another panelist presentation that you wanted to make sure that our audience knew.
I'll just say this, I don't think, this is probably true for all of us, but it's definitely true for the county. When Cliff and I were talking about this presentation, we recognized that we could not possibly give you every circumstance and the solution to every circumstance that exists under the sun. So one of the things we know is that people have an inherent distrust of government. But the best way to work this stuff out is to talk to us. And don't be afraid. From the county's perspective, we're not going to suddenly turn into the green ogre and issue notices of violation because you want to come in and resolve things. We're going to work with you to resolve that. So communication is the key. If you hear nothing else tonight, that's the message that I want to bring in your ears.
Yeah, I'll just add, I mean, it's a totally different environment from, I think, all of us were sitting here in 2014, 15, 16, working through an ordinance and working through thousands of cultivators and enforcement and all these things, and Humboldt County is a different landscape, you know, and so now we're in the collaboration phase, I hope, where we're working together to do the restoration that's necessary, you know. I mean, we're working with qualified cultivators too, trying to, you know, give them a leg up in this market, which is vastly different than 2016 or 17. So, you know, we want to help resolve all these things that have gone on in the past that have damaged, you know, the environment. And it's not just Humboldt County, but it's like, I think we're the first to really experience the market. And that's like the most simplest way to put it, you know, where we were first ordinance in the state. And now we're the first to experience like what happens when the market, you know, market forces impact an industry. So, you know, I hope we can figure it out. And like John said about, you know, talking to us, you know, talking to, you know, reach out when you have questions and don't be afraid, you know, because we're in a totally different era now, you know, and look forward to trying to figure it out with all of you and new landowners and, you know, nonprofits. So hopefully we'll be talking more.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity today. I have found over the last 10 years that there's a lot of individual conversations that are necessary to really sort out a particular site, and I don't really see any way around that. But in the process, there's a whole, a lot of the professional consultants have the knowledge, and as long as we can help impart the information, then we're all on the same team to bring this to full circle. And similarly with real estate agents recently, I've had great experiences being contacted by real estate agents and trying to sort out what the issues are and provide clarity to everybody in the mix. And though it's a little bit complicated, it's worth it. And so I see that that's what it's gonna take to get some of these bigger messes cleaned up and ensure that there's buyers can come in and enjoy the North Coast. So I, again, would just reiterate, let's continue to communicate and ask questions and share the information and try to keep it as transparent as possible. So, thank you.
Thank you. And if anyone wanted to get a copy of any of your presentations tonight in PDF, where would they be able to find that?
Nowhere.
You could give it to them, or they could contact me for mine.
We can get, if, with permission, I can get all of those presentations up on our website. There's a page that has they have the links to register to attend these events that will turn into watch these events, and I can add links in with presentations for the public to access.
So those presentations will be available on the Humboldt Association of Realtors website.
And there's a forum link at the top of the page. And
There's
I'll
a
get those up
forum link,
tomorrow.
and that'll be available to the general public.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. So I guess that brings me to thanking our panelists again for being here. The very fact that you're here tonight is testament that you want to continue communicating together with the public, with realtors, to find solutions for this big issue that's affecting our whole community. So this is great, and looking forward to future collaborations with all of your agencies. I also wanted to thank our tech team, Bridget and Teresa for holding it down. And Sandy for collecting and organizing all of our questions. And Stephanie, thank you for helping organize tonight's event as well. And with that, I will adjourn the meeting. And thank you everyone for coming out tonight, and look for the link on our website.